Hermione Granger and the Chamber of Secrets. Chapter 10. The Rogue Bludger. Hermione was having trouble sleeping. Her thoughts kept drifting during classes. Walking down the hallway, it seemed like all eyes were on her. She knew she was being paranoid, but she couldn't shake the overwhelming feeling growing exponentially. She didn't really fit in after all. The word mudblood haunted her. Just as Harry heard the mysterious whispering voice that no one else could hear, Hermione heard that word around every corner, whispered in every group. She felt singled out, watched. Hermione even found herself not putting her hand up as much as usual in classes. Before, she had been proud to stand out academically, but now there was a tiny yet growing ball of fear to call any attention to herself. The more she read and studied the Chamber of Secrets, the more the fear and anxiety grew. She still, however, looked forward to Defense Against the Dark Arts. She was able to stop or at least slow down her thoughts by just watching Lockhart teach. She hated to admit it, especially to Ron, but his looks made her forget what was going on at school. She could just lose herself in his eyes. Unfortunately, looking into those eyes made it more and more apparent that Ron was probably right when he said Lockhart was thick enough to write them the note for the restricted section. Since the disastrous episode of the Pixies, Professor Lockhart had not brought any live creatures to class. Instead, he read passages from his books to them and sometimes reenacted some of the more dramatic bits. He usually picked Harry to help him with these reconstructions. So far, Harry had been forced to play a simple Transylvanian villager whom Lockhart had cured of a bubbling curse, a yeti with a head cold, and a vampire who had been unable to eat anything except lettuce since Lockhart had dealt with him. Harry was brought to the front of the class during their very next Defense Against the Dark Arts lesson, this time acting a werewolf. Hermione knew Harry absolutely dreaded being pulled up in front of the class and had to suppress her giggles. And suppress his small pang of jealousy, of course, for being the star of Lockhart's attention like that. Nice, loud howl, Harry. Exactly. And then, if you'll believe it, I pounced like this, slammed him to the floor. Thus, with one hand, I managed to hold him down. With the other, I put my wand to his throat. I then screwed up my remaining strength and performed the immensely complex amorphous charm. He let out a piteous moan. Go on, Harry. Higher than that. Good. The fur vanished. The fangs shrank. And he turned back into a man. Simple, yet effective. And another village will remember me forever as the hero who delivered them from the monthly terror of werewolf attacks. The bell rang, and Lockhart got to his feet. Homework? Compose a poem about my defeat of the Wagga Wagga werewolf. Signed copies of Magical Me to the author of the best one. The class began to leave. Hermione's heart started to pound. She knew she had to go through with the plan, but she felt frozen. Not only was she intimidated by talking to Lockhart, but she was also terrified to follow through with a plan that was against so many rules. It was one thing to talk about the plan, but it was a totally different thing to do it. Ready? Harry muttered. Wait till everyone's gone, said Hermione nervously. All right. She approached Lockhart's desk, a piece of paper clutched tightly in her hand. Harry and Ron right behind her. Professor Lockhart? Hermione stammered. Her anxiety was out of control. She felt the words bubbling out of her mouth and tried to remember the script she had memorized. I want to get this book out of the library, just for background reading. She held out a piece of paper, her hand shaking slightly. But the thing is, It's in the restricted section of the library, so I need a teacher to sign it. I'm sure it would help me understand what you say in Gadding with Goals about slow acting venoms. Ah, Gadding with Goals, said Lockhart, taking Hermione's note and smiling mildly at her. Possibly my very favorite book. You enjoyed it? Oh, yes, said Hermione eagerly. Her eyes completely disarmed her. He was looking at her. He was noticing her. So clever. The way you trapped that last one with a tea strainer. Well, I'm sure no one will mind me giving the best student of the year a little extra help, said Lockhart warmly, and he pulled out an enormous peacock quill. Hermione almost fainted right then and there. It was just too much. Yes, nice, isn't it? He said, misreading the revolted look on Ron's face. I usually save it for book signings. He scrawled an enormous loopy signature on the note and handed it back to Hermione. His fingers brushed hers, and an electric shock traveled up her arm and into her head. Her ears started to buzz. So, Harry, said Lockhart, while Hermione folded the note with fumbling fingers and slipped it into her bag. She could barely hear what he was saying over the sound in her ears. Tomorrow's the first Quidditch match of the session, I believe. Gryffindor against Slytherin, is it not? I hear you're a useful player. I was a seeker too. I was asked to try for the national squad, but prefer to dedicate my life to the eradication of the dark forces. Still, if ever you feel the need for a little private training, don't hesitate to ask. Always happy to pass on my expertise to less able players. Ron was pushing Hermione out of the classroom by that point. She didn't even hear Harry's answer. All she could think about was how Lockhart had called her the best student of the year. She wasn't the mudblood at that moment. She was the best student of the year. I don't believe it, Harry said when he met them in the hallway, examining the signature on the note. He didn't even look at the book he wanted. That's because he's a brainless git, said Ron. But who cares? We've got what we needed. He's not a brainless git, said Hermione shrilly, as they half ran towards the library. She would not let Ron ruin that moment for her. Just because he said you were the best student of the year. She silenced him with the meanest look she could muster. They dropped their voices as they entered the muffled stillness of the library. Most potenty potions, Madame Pins, the librarian, repeated suspiciously, trying to take the note from Hermione, but Hermione wouldn't let go. To her, the note would be a constant reminder of what had just happened. I was wondering if I could keep it, she said breathlessly. Oh, come on, said Ron, wrenching it from her grasp and thrusting it at Madame Pins. We'll get you another autograph. Lockhart will sign anything if it stands still enough. If it stands still long enough. If they hadn't been standing in front of the strict librarian, Hermione would have hit him. Madame Pins held the note up to the light as though determined to detect a forgery, but it passed the test. She stalked away between the lofty shelves and returned several minutes later, carrying a large and moldy-looking book. Hermione put it carefully. Uh, Hermione put it carefully into her bag, and they left, trying not to walk too quickly or look too guilty. 5 minutes later, they were barricaded in Myrtle's bathroom once again. Hermione had overridden Ron's objections by pointing out that it was the last place anyone in their right minds would go, so they were guaranteed some privacy. Moaning Myrtle was crying noisily in her stall, but they ignored her, and them, which was perfectly fine with Hermione. Hermione opened most potency potions carefully, and the three of them bent over the damp spotted pages. It was clear from a glance why it belonged in the restricted sections. Some of the potions had effects almost too gruesome to think about, and there were some very unpleasant illustrations, which included a man who seemed to have been turned inside out and a witch sprouting several extra pairs of arms out of her head. Here it is, said Hermione excitedly as she found the page headed The Polyjuice Potion. It was decorated with drawings of people halfway through transforming into other people. Their pained faces terrified her, so she poured all of her attention to the ingredient list instead. This is the most complicated potion I've ever seen, said Hermione as she scanned the recipe. Lacewing flies, lychees, fluxweed, and knotgrass, she murmured, running her finger down the list of ingredients. Well, they're easy enough. They're in the student store cupboard. We can help ourselves. Oh, look, powdered horn of a bicorn. I don't know where we're going to get that. Shredded skin of a bloom slang. That will be tricky too. And of course, a bit of whoever we want to change into. Excuse me? Said Ron sharply. What do you mean a bit of whoever we're changing into? I'm drinking nothing with crab's toenails in. Hermione continued as though she hadn't heard him. We don't have to worry about that yet, though, because we add those bits last. Ron turned speechless to Harry, who had another worry. Do you realize how much we're going to have to steal, Hermione? Shredded skin of a boomslang. That's definitely not in the student's cupboard. Where are we going? What are we going to do? Break into Snape's private stores? I don't know if this is a good idea. Hermione shut the book with a snap. Oh, so now Harry realized how dangerous this plan was? She had been saying how dangerous it was all along, but didn't he understand what was at stake? If anything, the danger made Hermione's resolve even stronger. Having a clear path to finding out definitely whether or not Draco was the heir of Slytherin brought a certain amount of comfort to Hermione, and she wasn't about to let the boys drop out now. Well, if you two are going to chicken out, fine, she said. There were bright pink patches on her cheeks, and her eyes were brighter than usual. I don't want to break rules, you know. I think threatening Muggle-borns is far worse than brewing up a difficult potion. But if you don't want to find out if it's Malfoy, I'll go straight to Madam Pince now and hand the book back in. I never thought I'd see the day when you'd be persuading us to break rules, said Ron. All right, we'll do it. But no toenails, okay? How long will it take to make, anyway? Said Harry, as Hermione opened the book again. Well, since the fluxweed has got to be picked at the full moon, and the lacewings have got to be stewed for 21 days, I'd say it would be ready in about a month if we can get all the ingredients. A month? Said Ron. Malfoy could have attacked half the Muggle-borns in the school by then. But Hermione's eyes narrowed dangerously again, and he added swiftly, But it's the best plan we've got, so full steam ahead, I say. Hermione nodded her approval and made sure the coast was clear for them to leave the bathroom. She didn't want Percy or anyone else being suspicious of them, especially now that their plan was being set into motion. Hermione had laid out a detailed, multi-stepped plan in order to get each ingredient, but Harry and Ron didn't seem very impressed. Both were preoccupied with the upcoming Quidditch match again against Slytherin. Hermione let herself get pulled into the growing anticipation for the game, mostly because some parts of her plan couldn't be started until after the game that weekend. Hermione spent an extra few minutes that morning in her room, allowing Parvati to accessorize her outfit to show her house pride. Once she had enough Gryffindor spirit, according to Parvati, Hermione found a seat next to Ron and Neville in the Great Hall to grab some breakfast. Harry had woke early and headed down to the Quidditch pitch with Fred, George, Oliver, and the other members of the Gryffindor team. I hope Harry just knocks Malfoy off his broom, Ron said in between bites of his waffles. Then we won't have to drink toenails. Shh. Hermione elbowed him in the ribs and shot a look over toward Neville. Thankfully, he hadn't heard. Keep your mouth shut. Sod off, Ron said, rubbing his side. It's too loud in here for anyone to have heard me. Ron was right. The excitement of the match had created a cacophony of sounds in the great hall. Everyone was anxiously talking about the game in raised voices that echoed throughout the hall. As 11 o'clock approached, the whole school started to make its way down to the Quidditch stadium. It was a muggy sort of day with a hint of thunder in the air. Ron and Hermione came hurrying over to wish Harry good luck as he entered the locker rooms. They watched him disappear inside and then went to find a good seat. In front of them, Hermione noticed Parvati and Justin sitting together and holding hands. It made her smile. Before they knew it, the Gryffindors walked out onto the field. As they entered, a roar of noise greeting them. Mainly cheers because Ravenclaw and Hufflepuff were anxious to see. Sorry, Before they knew it, the Gryffindors walked out onto the field. As they entered, a roar of noise greeting them. Mainly cheers because Ravenclaw and Hufflepuff were anxious to see Slytherin beaten. But the Slytherins in the crowd made their boos and hisses heard too. Madam Hooch, the Quidditch teacher, asked Flint and Wood to shake hands, which they did, giving each other threatening stares and gripping rather harder than was necessary. On my whistle, said Madam Hooch. 3, 2, 1. With a roar from the crowd to speed them upward, the 14 players rose toward the leaden sky. Harry flew higher than any of them. Hermione could hardly keep track of him. A green blur crossed their line of sight. Malfoy. Hermione scowled at him, even though she knew it was impossible for him to see her. At that very moment, a heavy black bludger came pelting toward Harry. Hermione gasped as he narrowly dodged him. Thankfully, one of the tweens, she had a hard enough time telling them apart, even when they were on the ground in close proximity, flew towards Harry and, acting as the beater, knocked the bludger back toward the Slytherin. Inexplicably, the bludger changed direction in midair and shot straight for Harry again. Hermione and the rest of the crowd gasped. She didn't even realize she had grabbed onto Ron's hand. All eyes and all thoughts were on Harry. Harry dropped quickly to avoid it, and Weasley Beater managed to hit it hard toward Malfoy. Once again, the bludger swerved like a boomerang and shot at Harry's head. Harry put on a burst of speed and zoomed toward the other end of the field. The bludger was whistling along behind him. What was going on? Bludgers never concentrate on one player like this. It was their job to try and unseat as many people as possible. The other Weasley was waiting for the bludger at the other end. The crowd watched as Harry ducked as he swung at the bludger with all his might. The bludger was knocked off course. Just as Hermione started to let out a sigh of relief, the bludger swung back around as though it was magnetically attracted to Harry. At some point, it had begun to rain. Also, at some point, the Slytherins had scored 60 points. Hermione and the majority of the crowd hadn't noticed either of those things. Their focus was entirely on the insanity happening over their heads with Harry and the bludger. There were a group of Gryffindor fans trying to get Madame Hooch's attention so she could pause the game. Obviously, there was something wrong with the bludger. It had to have been tampered with. Finally, with the help of the crowd waving their arms, Oliver Wood managed to get Madame Hooch's attention. Madame Hooch's whistle rang out. Harry, Fred, and George dived for the ground, still trying to avoid the mad bludger. Hermione watched as the team met briefly on the pitch. To her surprise, the team flew back to their original positions after a moment. Madame Hooch blew her whistle again, and the game resumed. What are they doing? Hermione screamed. Why didn't they tell Madame Hooch to end the game? That would mean they'd forfeit the game, Ron explained. So? If they forfeit, Ron said, that means Gryffindor loses the game and Slytherin wins. So? Hermione said again incredulously. Harry's safety matters more than some stupid Quidditch game? But it's against Slytherin, Ron said with a confused look on his face. Hermione let out an exasperated sigh and turned back to the game, terrified of what she'd see. She watched Harry kick hard into the air on Madame Hooch's whistle, and the bludger quickly followed suit. Higher and higher, Harry climbed. He looped and swooped, spiraled, zigzagged, and rolled. He hung upside down, avoiding another fierce dive from the bludger. Harry began a kind of roller coaster ride around the edges of the stadium, squinting through the silver sheets of rain to the Gryffindor goalposts, where a Slytherin player was trying to score past who would. Hermione gasped as the bludger had just missed Harry again. He turned right over and sped in the opposite direction. Harry was forced to do a stupid kind of twirl in midair to dodge the bludger. A flash of green pulled Hermione's eyes from the bludger to Draco Malfoy flying past Harry. It looked to her like Malfoy had seen the golden snitch. After all of this, if the Slytherins won, Hermione couldn't even finish the thought. A sickening whack echoed through the pitch. The bludger had finally found its mark. Harry's arm bore the brunt of the attack. Hermione could tell Harry was in pain. His right arm was just hanging down at his side. Nonetheless, Harry was still going after the snitch. Through a haze of rain, Hermione watched Harry dive past Draco with his other arm outstretched, and then he started to fall and fall and fall. With a splattering thud, Harry hit the mud and rolled off his broom. His arm was hanging at a very strange angle, but the snitch was clutched in his good hand. A roar went up through the crowd, though Hermione stayed silent, watching Harry on the muddy ground. His eyes rolled up in his head, and he limply fell back to the ground. He had fainted. Next to her, Ron was cheering with the rest of the crowd. She grabbed him by the back of his jacket and yanked him out of his seat and towards the stairs. Hermione had to get to the beach to make sure Harry was okay. She nearly tripped over Colin, who was doing the same. "Colin, move!" Hermione said. They rushed past him and onto the beach where the crowd of professors and fellow Gryffindors had already started to gather. Hermione pushed her way through the crowd as close to Harry as she and Ron could get. Harry appeared to be starting to gain consciousness as Professor Lockhart leaned over him. "Oh no, not you," Harry moaned. "Doesn't know what he's saying," said Lockhart loudly to the anxious crowd of Gryffindors pressing around him. "Don't worry, Harry. I'm about to fix your arm." "No," said Harry. "I'll keep it like this. Thanks." A clicking sound interrupted Harry. Hermione turned to see Colin right behind her. "I don't want to follow up this, Colin," Harry said loudly. "Lie back, Harry," said Lockhart soothingly. "It's a simple charm I've used countless times." "Why can't I just go to the hospital wing?" said Harry through clenched teeth. "He should really, Professor," said a muddy Wood, who couldn't help grinning even though his seeker was injured. "Great capture, Harry. Really spectacular. Your best yet, I'd say." "Stand back," said Lockhart, who was rolling up his jade green sleeves. "No, don't," said Harry weakly. But Lockhart was twirling his wand and a second later had directed it straight at Harry's arm. Hermione watched as purple sparks flew out of Lockhart's wand. They matched his robes, she noticed briefly, before her attention was turned back to Harry. A gasp rippled through the crowd as Harry's arm seemed to melt right before their eyes. Colin started clicking the shutter faster and faster. Lockhart was obstructing her view of Harry, and she couldn't tell what was wrong. Gilderoy Lockhart stood up and cleared his throat. Ah, said Lockhart. Well, yes, that can sometimes happen. But the point is, the bones are no longer broken. That's the thing to bear in mind. So, Harry, just cuddle up to the hospital wing. Ah, Mr. Weasley, Miss Granger, would you escort him? And Madame Pomfrey will be able to tidy you up a bit. Hermione finally got her first view of Harry. To her absolute horror, he looked strangely lopsided. Poking out of the end of his robes was what looked like a thick, flesh colored rubber glove. Lockhart hadn't mended Harry's bones, he had removed them. Madame Pomfrey wasn't at all pleased. Frankly, Hermione couldn't blame her, though a mistake was a mistake after all. You should have come straight to me, she raged, holding up the sad, limp reminder of what half an hour before had been a working arm. I can mend bones in a second, but growing them back? You will be able to, won't you? Said Harry desperately. I'll be able to, certainly, but it will be painful, said Madame Pomfrey, grimly, throwing Harry a pair of pajamas. You'll have to stay the night. Hermione waited outside the curtain partition drawn around Harry's bed while Ron helped him into his pajamas. It took a while to stuff the rubbery, boneless arm into a sleeve. How can you stick up for Lockhart now, Hermione, huh? Ron called through the curtains as he pulled Harry's limp fingers through the cuff. If Harry had wanted the boning, he would have asked. Anyone can make a mistake, said Hermione. And it doesn't hurt anymore, does it, Harry? No, said Harry, getting into bed. But it doesn't do anything else either. As he swung himself onto the bed, his arm flopped pointlessly. Hermione and Madame Pomfrey came around the curtain. Madame Pomfrey was holding a large bottle of something labeled Skelligro. You're in for a rough night, she said, pouring out a steaming beakerful and handing it to him. Regrowing bones is a nasty business. Harry choked down the liquid, making him cough and splutter. Still touching about dangerous sports and inept teachers, Madame Pomfrey retreated, leaving Ron and Hermione to help Harry gulp down some water. We won, though, said Ron, a grin breaking across his face. That was some catch you made. Malfoy's face. He looked ready to kill. I want to know how he fixed that Bludger, said Hermione darkly. We can add that to the list of questions we'll ask him when we've taken the Polyjuice potion, said Harry, sinking back into his pillows. I hope it is better than this stuff. If it's got bits of Slytherin in it, you've got to be joking, said Ron. The door of the hospital wing burst open at that moment. Filthy and soaking wet, the rest of the Gryffindor team had arrived to see Harry. Unbelievable flying, Harry, said George. I've just seen Marcus Flint yelling at Malfoy. Something about having the snitch on top of his head and not noticing. Malfoy didn't seem too happy. They had brought cakes, sweets, and bottles of pumpkin juice. They gathered around Harry's bed and were just getting to start on what promised to be a good party when Madame Pomfrey came storming over, shouting, This boy needs rest. He's got 33 bones to regrow. Out! Out!